On this episode of Rethink Real Estate, we're going through us versus them. I know we've done other episodes where it's on other auction companies, but I'm just laying it out in a little bit of a different fashion. This was a video that we're recording to have on our more information page on the website because it's interesting as we're doing more and more volume of presentations to people. One of the follow-up questions, as I explained on the episode, is, well, guys, this makes so much sense. Who else is doing it? And wanting to take people through from a perspective of why our process is vastly different to the way that other auction companies are working. So again, hopefully you enjoy. It is a little bit similar to some of the other episodes, but hopefully it helps. Thanks so much. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. One of the questions that we get typically after finishing a presentation to an agent or a seller, after the process making as much logical sense as it does, is who is your competition or who else is doing this? So today I want to shed some light on some of the other competitors within the auction space and why their models are vastly different to ours. And in order to do that, I need to start from the very beginning. And the very beginning goes all the way back 130 years to Harcourts in Australia and New Zealand. Now, in Australia and New Zealand, 60 to 70% of all real estate transactions are done via non-distressed auction. And it has been known across the real estate world that it is the most efficient real estate transaction in the world, full stop. In some of the recent National Association of Realtors, NAR, studies that they did on the real estate transactions with the lawsuits that happened in the real estate space, if you're familiar with those, in those studies that were done, Australian and New Zealand real estate practices, by way of which is non-distressed auction, was nominated as one of the most efficient real estate models and transparent real estate models in the world. Now, we have been doing this for over 130 years, as mentioned, and we've adapted to a few other countries along the way. We do in excess of 13,000 non-distressed auctions every year within 11 different countries. And about 10 years ago, we came over to North America. More specifically, we landed in Southern California. And one of the things we did for the first 12 months was a feasibility study on why auction was either going to work or not going to work in this marketplace. We were so curious around why was auction a mainstream method of sale in many other different industries, and why wasn't it something in the real estate space? Now, we had to obviously come to the conclusion, first and foremost, is that the word auction is something that is probably not the nicest word in real estate, a dirty word as I would phrase. However, that being said, is that it gives us a distinct advantage when it comes to marketing a property, because I've never met somebody that wants to pay too much. So that wasn't the reason we believed that auction wasn't a mainstream thing in the residential real estate resale space. We then started to look at the auction practices of other companies that had tried to put in place some format of a non-distressed auction model. And that being said, is that once we went through all of these individual models that were there, we figured out a few fundamental flaws to why the auction practice was not mainstream in the residential real estate space. Now, a couple of things that come to mind first and foremost. One is the exorbitant marketing fees that most companies charge upfront to a seller. The second one was a buyer premium that was attached to the sale for any buyer that was involved. And the third one, which was pretty interesting to us, was conducting absolute auctions. Now, what an absolute auction means is that the seller is not in complete control and they are obligated to sell regardless of what the outcome was. So these were three major factors that very instantaneously we looked at and said, well, these practices don't exist anywhere else in the world where auction is a mainstream element to sell your primary place of residence or a piece of real estate that was not in a distressed manner. So we knew instantly that our model could not replicate those models. Now, don't get me wrong. There was a moment of disappointment realizing that we were not going to get 10, 12, 15% buyer premiums as the auction house. But we had to manage greed and we had to find out why this was not in the mainstream. So we chose the path of partnering with local realtors and doing high volumes of transactions. One, to create a good cadence within that marketplace and an understanding. but also partnering with the traditional real estate brokers on the ground that were there to know why the property was what it was, why someone should buy it, okay, where it is and what it offers. That emotional element of that transaction and removing the traditional real estate broker from the equation was never going to work because it needs that localized boots on the ground specialty. Now, as we explored all of the various things that were different in the real estate space to any other country that has it as a mainstream element when you go to sell your home, some things started to really be pointed out of why this was not something that had been embraced. I'm going to go back to the different types of auctions. Now, to be clear about this is that Harcourts Auctions only conducts what is called a reserve auction. Now, a reserve auction means, okay, that the seller is never obligated to sell and they are in complete control. As we phrase it, is we call it a non-disclosed reserve price. And the reason it is non-disclosed is so that therefore the seller can see what the marketplace is offering and choose to adjust their non-disclosed reserve price at any point. Obviously, the seller is always in complete control. And to reiterate again, Harcourts does not do auctions where the seller is ever obligated to sell. And we believe that the auction process is about price discovery in the market, whether that's a wonderful, unbelievable, outrageously huge price for the property, or that is a price that might be a little underwhelming, but it was about finding what the market was willing to do at that time and allowing the seller to say yes or no. Most of the other companies that were operating at the time that we entered the marketplace 10 years ago were only doing what is called an absolute auction, which is a no reserve auction where the seller is obligated to sell. So that is a great deal of risk for the seller to do an auction if they are obligated to sell. Now, the other factor of this, to make it clear, Harcourts does not charge any large marketing fees up front. We do charge an administration fee that is very minute, but then also you have to get the reports and disclosures done that would normally be done when that property is either under contract in the investigation period or in escrow in the inspection contingency period. Now, the reality is we ask for all of those reports and disclosures to be done up front, and there is a nominal administration fee up front. Other companies were charging $50, $100, $150, upwards of $250,000 up front to do the marketing for the property. Now, a lot of the times those marketing costs were not for actual marketing themselves. It was just to cover the cost of the auction company so that therefore they would always make money regardless of whether the property sold or it didn't. Now, once we introduced the non-disclosed reserve auction into North America, we then saw a lot of the other companies that could not compete with this facet actually change their approach. If you were to do a non-disclosed reserve auction with another company, they would ask for the marketing fee up front because there was no guarantee of sale. Now, if you were to do a non-reserve auction or an absolute auction, they would waive the marketing fee, but obviously when the property sold at auction, they would also not only get a buyer premium of 5, 10, 12, 15%, they would also tack onto that fee a marketing cost that the seller would then also pay. So all of these models then started to change, but it started to get a little bit more complicated. So again, they would either charge you a marketing fee up front if you chose to do a reserve auction where you were in complete control, okay? And if you chose to cancel that auction, you would then be charged that marketing fee, again, also, or portion of the buyer premium as a cancellation fee. Now, for those that then chose as an incentive to do a non-reserve auction to more guarantee the sale, okay, and again, we have seen catastrophic results in this case, is that they would then tack on still the marketing fee on the back end of things. And if you did choose to cancel, there was the buyer premium and also the cancellation fee of the marketing fee that would have to be paid also. All of this became very complicated and very arduous and was very clear to us why those businesses were not growing. The part that I'm not explaining or haven't explained is the buyer premium element. Most of these other companies, 99% of the other companies, charge what is called a buyer premium. To be clear about the Harcourts auction non-distress process is that we do not charge any additional costs for a buyer or the agents to be involved. because it didn't seem right to us. If you were charging a 10% buyer premium, the buyer bought the property for $1 million, they would need to pay a $100,000 buyer premium on the sale as well. So naturally, they would probably only bid $900,000 because they had to take into consideration the buyer premium. That money is coming directly out of the seller's pocket, regardless of where it's being dispersed from. And then if you add on the marketing fees, I know that this is at the moment probably a little bit confusing, but I believe it's designed to be from the other companies. Our transaction, okay, our transaction is designed to be one of which is a price discovery process with the traditional real estate broker and the assistance of the auction team. We charge a 1% fee if the property sells. If the property sells before auction, on the day, or within a short period of time after. And if it doesn't sell, there are no cancellation fees. And if you choose not to sell the property or take it through to auction, there is nothing of that perspective. This is a price discovery process. Our process has been designed for you to find out what the market is going to pay and then say yes or no as a seller. That is one of the things that is so important, that a lot of companies have a disconnect. And when I say a lot, every other auction company has a disconnect. This is a price discovery. And if it's not right now that you choose to accept that market, then we choose to put it back on market at another time. Again, we choose to use our auction process as a price discovery to create the most amount of leverage in that moment. It's not to say the home isn't worth more. It might just be worth more later. So all of this taken into consideration in the other auction companies' models, you need to be clear on something. And I'm going to put something up on the screen now, is that these are the different models that are there. You need to be conscious that between 35 and 45% could be the amount of money that is taken off the table if you choose to use another auction company. These models are designed to create large fees, complicated structures, and they are only designed to do 1 or 2 auctions ever within a particular marketplace, because usually the result doesn't pan out very well. Okay, so therefore it ends up in litigation, or it ends up with a bad reputation in the marketplace because everything is overpromised and then underdelivered. So because of the buyer premiums and the large fees that are taken from the sellers and the buyers, those companies only need to do 1 auction ever within a marketplace and move on to the next. Our model is designed to be another tool in the tool belt for local realtors to provide to sellers in particular situations if the property isn't selling. Okay, using the auction process to provoke interest within that marketplace, using it from the very beginning to find out what the property is worth in today's marketplace very quickly to then price it accurately if we do not sell it through auction in the first case. It is a moldable and malleable process, ours, that can be pivoted at any point, because having a rigid structure is one of the most probably naive things I would say that people can do. And that to be said, our auction process, we allow it to be sold before auction in the lead up, because 98% of people want to avoid competition. If it makes sense, we will take it through to auction day. If it doesn't, then we don't do that. We can postpone. We can then put the property traditional. There are so many different elements and so many different ways that we can use this process as, again, another tool in the tool belt, all while being a low barrier to entry and partnering with your local realtor in order to make sure that we find out what the property is worth in today's market and provide the decision makers with a chance to say yes or a chance to say no. Hopefully this has shed a little bit of light. If it has been confusing, I get it. I think it's been designed by the other companies to be confusing. Keep in mind, we are the largest non-distressed real estate company, auction company in the world. We do over 13,000 non-distressed auctions and been doing it for over 130 years. So the principle with the process has not been lost. It's just been modernized. Thanks so much. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.